everyone, and welcome to a new episode of MICAST, MICA's official podcast. This is your host, Pallavi.
And this is your host, Kasturi. This season is all about the Media Masters, where we take a deep dive into the ever evolving world of media and entertainment, seeking out stories, insights, and behind the scenes processes for you to hear. Today, we'll be discussing the world of comic books and graphic novels.
We're excited to have Miss Reena Puri, executive editor at Amar Chitra Katha Comics and former associate editor at Tinkle Comics, with us today on this episode of the Media Masters. Thank you so much for joining us today, ma'am.
Hi Pallavi and hi Kasturi. It's wonderful being here with both of you.
So, starting right off with the first question, Amar Chitra Katha is very dear to many young Indians. A lot of us grew up on these books alongside Tinkle Comics. You have spent nearly 3 decades with ACT Media. So, can you tell us what drew you to the world of comics?
First of all, thank you so much for saying that Amar Chitra Katha is loved by lots and lots of people, and it really truly is. We always say that we cater to generations from 8 to 80. So thank you for that. Well, I never started out, wanting to be in comics or anything of the sort. And I studied my English literature in college, and there were no journalism courses in those days, like really long, long ago. But later on, I became a journalist. I was working for newspapers, and we happened to move to Bombay. So when we moved to Bombay, I was looking for a job, and I saw two jobs. One was for a business paper, a newspaper, and the other one said assistant editor, Tinkle. So I applied for both of them, and I gave both the interviews. Believe me, I enjoyed the Tinkle interview and the test much more because I had to write a comic on Shikari Shambu. And that was the first time I was meeting Shikari Shambu because I had never read Tinkle. In my time, there was no Tinkle. But I knew about Tinkle because of my kids. So when I got home that day and I, sort of finished the test, and I got letters from and a call from both the places saying that I had got the jobs. Both the places had offered me the jobs. And I was just sitting at home and mulling over it and wondering, joining a prestigious business paper is a big thing, for any journalist. And then I happened to mention Tinkle, and my 9-year-old son, he said, "Ma, you got into Tinkle? You have to take Tinkle. There's no option. You have to go to Tinkle. It's a lovely comic." I knew nothing about Tinkle or anything else, but he sounded so enthusiastic and he was so happy about it. And I had spent my whole childhood reading comics. We had Superman, Batman, Phantom, a whole lot of them. So when he said that and I saw his excitement, I said, why not? Why not, write comics? And that's how I joined Tinkle.
That's such a cute story that your son was like, "Oh, I think you should really do this. You'll have a great time." And I love it so much. And a big part of that love that we have for these comics and also ACK comes from Anand Pai, also known lovingly as Uncle Pai. Um, and he's the reason ACK has that kind of impact that it has today. So could you tell us a little bit about how, along with him, some of the earlier tunes were created?
Sure. See, Tinkle started in 1980 and Amar Chitra Katha started in 1967. So there was a big gap there. And the reason why Mr. Pai created Tinkle was because he wanted something to do with science and general knowledge. And he said, let's leave out history and gods and goddesses and just focus on what children love today. Yeah. So when I came into Tinkle and I met this great man who had this booming laugh, and he had such a wonderful, way of dealing with his staff, dealing with us. And he just handed me Tinkle and he said, you take it on from here. You have to run it the way you want to run it. So here was this man. I didn't know really at that time what a great man he was, and how big his persona was. For me, it was just Mr. Pai, and he was in the office, and I was writing for him. But slowly over the years, as I worked with him, I realized what an enormous personality he had. He was something else. I tell you, he was just something else. He thought like a child. He had a strange business head. And he used to get excited about things like a kid. He would think stories, he would think children, and he was so focused on his work. And he conveyed that to us. He just sort of imparted that to us. And when I joined, there was already Shikari Shambu, there was already Tantri the Mantri, there was Kalia the Crow, the old Kalia the Crow. So I got to know them and I got to love them. And then I heard their story, how they were created. So Suppandi, of course, Suppandi being the most popular of all the tunes in earlier Tinkle and even today actually. Suppandi was created from a character called Chappandi. I think his name is Chappandi, and it's a Tamil character. He's a Tamil character and he is a goofball there also. But he became Suppandi in Tinkle, and his stories started revolving around his master, master and servant thing. Earlier it used to be master and servant. Today it's changed. Now Suppandi has gone to school and college and he's evolved a lot. But that's how Suppandi started. But when I started working, there was a little boy who wrote in and said, "Why don't we have a little Suppandi?" So then I asked Mr. Paisa, "Can we create some little Suppandi stories?" He said, "Why not?" So then we went back to Suppandi's childhood and we created a village and we created his grandmother and we, made him a little boy who was as bad as ever, in keeping any, even in his school or whatever, because we sent him to school at that point. So I did create Little Suppandi, but the earlier team, the original team, created Suppandi himself. And Kalia the Crow was created by Luis Fernandez, who was also the editor of Tinkle after I had left, but he was there in the earliest team. And Subbu Rao, who used to be with Mr. Pai's team, he's a very prolific writer, and he was there with the first team of Amar Chitra Katha. So he told me how Louis was talking about a crow which comes to his window, and he feels he can sort of talk to him, and he had a character, he had a persona of his own. And so Mr. Pai said, "There you are, you have a crow, you have a character. There's Kalia the Crow." So that's how Kalia the Crow was born. Tantri's evolution, I don't really remember, but Shikari Shambu again was Luis Fernandez and Subbarao. So it's the earliest team of Tinkle who created these characters and who created these tunes, because they passionately believed that children should have a comic which is pure fun and also linked to school in some way, but which caters to them while they are like ACK, caters to children even after they grow up. But Tinkle is supposed to be your friend. So these tunes were supposed to be friends. So that's how these tunes were created and evolved and still evolving, I'd say.
I love that you call them friends, because the way you're talking about them is making me feel like you're talking about my childhood friends. There's a small anecdote I want to tell you about. So Tinkle was something my mom used to make me read on long train journeys. Don't bother me here. Have 5 tinkles. Don't talk to me right now. I'm going to go to bed. And so in that, Suppandi became a story that I really like. Like I really loved Suppandi. And I love that you told us about his origin. After that, when I got my mom also to read those stories, that look, this is what I'm reading, look how fun this is. Every time I would do something silly, she was like, "What is this Suppandi behavior you are doing?" So then that character kind of became something that, my mom would tease me with. So that's how tied these stories are into our childhoods, I think.
Yes, that's so true. In fact, the decision to create Little Shambhu also came out of this need to see Shambhu as a little kid. So there's Savio Mascarenas, who's now our group art director, and we were both in Mr. Pai's team. And again, we thought of having Little Shambhu. And when we created Little Shambhu, we had to have Shanti also in it, his wife. So then Shanti was the next door neighbor who came with her cat, Kitu. And Shambhu had a dog called Dum Dum, and because of Kitu and Dum Dum, they both met. So those stories evolved, of Little Shambhu. And I still remember when we were making the first story of Little Shambhu, Mr. Halbe was the person who first drew Shambhu. He's the originator, he's the creator of the character of Shambhu. And so when we were making that first comic, so Savio put Mr. Halbe in one of the balconies. Like the scene is that Little Shambhu is walking down the road, and like there's the story is going on, it's about Little Shambhu, but there's this man standing in a balcony and he's looking down. And this is a secret between Savio and me, that actually that is Mr. Halbe sitting and watching his creation as a child walking down the road. So if you ever read the first Little Shambhu, you will see Mr. Halbe standing on the balcony in the first panel.